From North Carolina to Hollywood and back home again, my exclusive interviews with screenwriter Angus Maclachlan and producer, writer, director Gary Wheeler. It's all coming up next on Below the Line on Location.
It's Below the Line with George Peroulas. Tonight's guests are...
I'm in Davidson, North Carolina at the private screening of the movie The Trial, which filmed in this area. My interview with Gary Wheeler is coming up in just a bit, but first I traveled to Winston-Salem, North Carolina to meet with screenwriter Angus Maclachlan. Joining me now is Hollywood screenwriter Angus Maclachlan. Thank you so much for coming. You grew up here in Winston-Salem. We're on location today. So how did you get started writing?
Well, I went to the North Carolina School of the Arts and was educated as an actor. And I started writing actually monologues for myself for auditions. And then when I graduated from the school, I decided I'd try to write a play. And then I wanted to produce it, and I produced it locally. And then actually it eventually went to New York off Broadway. And it actually, my first play was what eventually became Junebug. So for a long time, though, I wrote mostly plays because I thought I could produce them myself, and then I would do them locally, and then I wanted to get an agent, so I got an agent, and then my plays were done in New York and London and Chicago and other places. And I actually was writing screenplays, but a lot of people, films are so expensive. So it wasn't until a friend of mine who also grew up here, Phil Morrison, who went to NYU Film School, he came to me and said, let's make a film, and so that eventually became Junebug.
And speaking of Junebug, that had a lot of attention in 2005. Amy Adams, most notably for her nomination for the Academy Award. Now tell me how that all happened when you found out.
Well, what's interesting is that she just auditioned. She had done a number of films, but hadn't really, clicked in sort of a big way. Although she had done a Steven Spielberg film before, Catch Me If You Can. So she just auditioned with a lot of other actors in LA for the director. And then when we got into Sundance, she actually won a special award there. And then she won a whole lot of different awards in kind of leading up to the Academy Award. And it was thrilling. It was incredible. My wife and I got to go to to LA that year and to sort of see her on the show and see clips of what I wrote was just kind of mind-blowing. It was incredible.
How do you begin writing a story and developing characters? What is your process?
It usually takes a long time. I come up with I have notebooks that I keep of incidents or ideas, and there usually is a long sort of gestation period, and then eventually there comes a time where it feels like a story sort of coalesces. When I've taught writing, I've often said it's kind of like remembering a dream, in that you wake up in the morning and you say, I had a dream last night where, my third grade teacher was there. It's like you remember something that has an emotional connection, and then if you can kind of be quiet, you remember more and more things like, oh yeah, and there was Lee Glenn who was in my class, and my dog came in, and gradually sort of an emotionally based story emerges from your dream life, and that's what it feels like to me to write original stories. That something very gradually comes up from your unconscious, and then of course you use your craft and your tools to shape it into an actual narrative story.
So when you begin to write, mind or just kind of feel from within?
I don't generally say I'm going to write a crime story, I'm going to write a comedy. Sometimes if I've just written something very serious, I think maybe I'll think of something. But generally I feel like I need to write the things that something else beyond my conscious mind decides what I need to write.
As you develop scenes and characters, how much of your real-life experiences goes into your work?
Well, again, when I've taught, I've often said that creating characters and creating stories too is kind of like Frankenstein's monster, and I think it's part of it is through observation of life around you. Part of it always kind of comes from your own life, and then part of it is completely just imagination. So you kind of smush all those things together, and hope that you produce something that's alive and organic.
Have you met her?
Now, you mentioned Junebug. How did you come up with the name of the movie and the script, and how did that all come together?
Well, it was actually, as I said, based on a play, and the play was called Divertimento. And when we were developing, when Phil and I, the director and I, were developing the script, we thought, well, that's not we don't really want to use that for the film. So we came up with a lot of different names, but eventually Phil came up with Junebug, which is the name that Amy Adams' character wants to name her baby, whether it's a boy or a girl.
And after the international recognition of Junebug, what happens to a screenwriter? Do the phones ring more? What happens? I had an agent for my plays. I'm with the Gersh agency, and I kept trying to get someone who was in the film division to look at my screenplays for years, and they wouldn't do it. But as soon as our film got into Sundance, I suddenly had 3 film agents. So that happened. And then certainly Junebug allowed people to know who I was, and people were more amenable to reading my material. So it did open doors that way. It doesn't really assure that things will immediately get made. Obviously, my next film will come out in October, and it's been 5 years. It took quite a while for that to happen. But it certainly made people aware of my work, and more people would say, yeah, I'll take a look at their stuff. Very good. Coming up next, more with screenwriter Angus Maclachlan right after these messages. We're back with screenwriter Angus Maclachlan. Now let's talk about the business side of screenwriting. You get agents, managers. How does all that work when you're starting out?
Well, you know, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. So I, as I said, had an agent for my plays, which I actually got through just really cold calling, and there's not a lot of agents who will accept unsolicited plays anymore. I got that thing that's called Dramatist Source Book, and they did list agents for plays that would accept unsolicited manuscripts. So I, knocked on doors. It's just really like, being a traveling salesperson until someone said, I'll take a look at what you have. And then, as I said, I was already with an agency that had a film division, but they wouldn't pay me any attention until I actually had a film. So a lot of times these days, people really produce their work first, somehow get it produced, and then use that as a calling card to sort of get into an agent. And then you kind of proceed from there. Once you have an agent, that agent will represent you. In terms of now the business, I'm an independent filmmaker. I don't really work with the studio system in any way, which doesn't even really exist much anymore. I have had offers since Junebug of plays and things from large companies, and it just hasn't either worked out where I responded to the material or usually that's what it is I don't respond to whatever book they send to me. But it just takes such a long time to develop anything, to get anything done. I have right now, I think, 4 or 5 screenplays that are at different levels of, hopefully someday, knock wood, coming together. They're either have actors attached or directors attached, or they're with a producer, and they're just trying to kind of come together. It really feels like a Rubik's Cube of there's so many elements that at every moment could fall completely apart.